Excellent. Thanks, Ella. Thanks, Katie. So yeah, we're really excited to share some progress that we've made. I just want to thank everybody for taking time during their lunch to chime in and kind of look at what we have. So by way of introduction, I know a lot of faces out there, but for those of you who don't know me, I'm Todd Schechinger, a landscape architect associate with Schmidt Design Group. I'm the Regional Design Advisory Council Vice Chair and also the Regional Development Subcommittee Chair, along with Evan Frazier. Today's subcommittee will be having a couple of speakers as a part of this effort that we've been having. Jonathan French, Francesca Rdac, Phil Bona, Evan Frazier will be our speakers, but also as a part of this effort, we've also had DK Aniwo and Jack Carpenter as our emeritus member. So with that, we'll just get right into it. I'll share my screen. So, Midway Pacific Highway District Community Evaluation. So just to clarify, this really is a district-wide evaluation. We're not really focusing too much on the Midway Rising, though we do understand that that is a massive opportunity and a huge catalyst for change in this area of San Diego. So as Katie mentioned, we're the Regional Design Advisory Council, and just for a quick history, previously there were two entities. There was the AIA Urban Design Committee and there was the Environment Design Council. And 2 years ago, those merged into the RDAC, which we have now. Within the RDAC, we have two subcommittees. We have a Regional Development Subcommittee, and we have a Design Governance Subcommittee. Today's effort is really going to be focused on the progress made within the Regional Development Subcommittee. And we're really focused on research, right? Advocacy, boots on the ground kind of stuff. So we do our research and we start to talk about what's happening in the region. And then from there, we kind of pool our discussion in a forum and start to document our evaluation of the different projects that are going on, the policies that are changing, and we use that as our benchmark to move forward. Always knowing that the goal is to really just advocate for good design in San Diego and how we can build better communities. And community is also the communities that we share, but it also includes environmental communities and habitats. So communities is more of a holistic term. So as I mentioned earlier, today's evaluation is going to be through the subcommittee, and we already introduced everybody there. So when we first started the subcommittee, probably a little over a year ago, we started to ask ourselves, what are we going to be evaluating and how are we going to be doing this evaluation? So we didn't know if we were going to be doing projects or districts or large scale planning. So what we wanted to do was just kind of create a series of criteria that could be scalable and encompass everything from evaluating a project's housing and policy to this being a district-wide thing. So these are the criteria that we determined were the things that were essential into building better communities. And for today's effort, we'll really be focusing on housing and policy, density and massing, open space planning, and connectivity, contextual relationships, and we'll also be touching on sustainability and green infrastructure. So after we developed this list, we're like, okay, so what projects are we going to look at? And then, we had a larger subcommittee, and on that subcommittee was DK, and DK being the head of the community planning group of Midway, he was like, why don't we do Midway as our pilot project? So with so much going on with Midway and with the NAV wars and SPA war and all these things going on, we were like, that seems like the perfect time and the perfect project to really sink our teeth into. So we've been doing a lot of research, and it started out as just a wide exploration, but we've definitely been refining our process, and that's what we're going to be sharing with you today. So just to kind of start with a summary of the overall Midway District, historically, this is a very low-lying area. Partially, we're outside of the coastal zone. The Marine Corps base down there to the bottom is inside of the coastal zone, but a lot of the private space that you see is outside of it. The tan area is government-owned land, and then you can see the Midway Rising that we've somewhat photoshopped in there a little bit. But this area has really been shaped by industry, transportation, military, and aviation. The military does represent a large portion of the community. And as a part of the community plan, this district has been organized into sub-districts and villages. So once we realized we were going to be looking at Midway, the first thing we did was we went through the community plan and we determined what does the city want to do? And we use that as a benchmark to understand what's the city's goals for this area. And then we use that as an evaluation to understand, okay, wow, us, how can we utilize our professional expertise to start to evaluate that and provide some different suggestions or just an overall evaluation of the community plan itself. So then as we started to understand and educate ourselves on the community plan, we started to understand that each district has its own priorities. And a lot of these priorities range from the Midway Rising area up here that calls for a pedestrian-oriented entertainment area as a landmark feature, to all these different districts having interconnected bicycle and ped. So there's very lofty goals of taking the gray field that you see as the Midway District and really turning it into an interconnected bike and multimodal transit network. Though it doesn't represent that now, the community plan from 2018 does have that in its goals, and the community plan is pretty solid. But all things considered, there's been a lot of change since 2018 with the NAB war and Midway Rising. So with so much change happening in such a quick amount of time, we really thought that this was a great candidate for our evaluation. So moving right into the first section with housing. Go ahead, Phil. Are you there, Phil? Okay, we'll come back to housing. Katie, is Phil on the call? I can't check the.
Yeah, he is on the call. Phil, if you're speaking, we can't hear you. Oh, he just dropped off, so he might be trying to reconnect.
Okay. All right. Well, then we'll come back to housing and let Phil go through his section. And then maybe we just go right into you, Francesca.
Sure. So it's no secret that traffic congestion is an issue in the Midway. There are some existing uses that contribute to that traffic. So things like big box retail in the area. In addition to that, there's a lot of underutilized land. And historically, because of previous zoning designations, there's been a lot of industrial activity that's adjacent to the San Diego River, which is not a particularly compatible use for sensitive, to be adjacent to sensitive a sensitive ecosystem. So in addition to all of that, another challenge is the existing zoning doesn't support an appropriate amount of density. So it's really geared towards commercial uses. You can see all of the orange and pink is a commercial designated zone, and there are some pockets of multifamily zoning and some higher allowed densities. But based solely on the base zones here and speaking very, very, very generally, there's not a lot of opportunity for a financially viable multifamily or mixed use project in the Midway District. Fortunately, we do have a number of tools at our disposal, the first one being the state density bonus. And I'll just go straight into a little thought experiment here. So if you take CC 3-6, the base density is 1 dwelling unit per 1,000 square foot of lot area. So if we had a 16,000 square foot lot, that would allow us a 16 unit project. If we applied the maximum density bonus available to us by the state, that would be a 1.5 increase, and that would give us a total of 24 dwelling units on that parcel. And I'll just note, while this exhibit is showing the zoning per San Diego, the general plan is pretty similar in terms of densities. There's not a significant difference, so I won't get into that, but I just wanted to make note of that. So a 24 unit project on a 16,000 square foot lot, as far as like an urban infill project, is not a really particularly viable project in most circumstances. And if this was located within, say, for example, a tier 3 complete community zoning designation, you might be able to easily get something like 60 1 and 2 bedroom units on a project, you know, assuming that the lot constraints were amenable to that. So there is one exception to the state density bonus. If you are within a half-mile of public transit, and you provide 100% affordable units, you are allowed unlimited density and a 33-foot or 3-story increase by right. So Todd, if you could go to the next slide. So the purple hatch, the light purple hatch here is what City of San Diego has designated as a transit priority area, or in other words, it's any area that is located within a half-mile of public transit. And you can see that the majority of the Midway District, with the exception of the military-owned land, is actually within a TPA. And so it would be eligible to utilize the state density bonus for that unlimited density if a project provided 100% affordable units. So while affordable units are extremely important and to San Diego, concentrating them in one area or one district doesn't lead to a particularly, we'd rather see them dispersed throughout an area. So moving on to our second tool, which is complete communities. There's actually a large designation of complete communities within the Midway District. Unfortunately for us, we're this yellow hatch, which is also known as the coastal height limit and coastal overlay zone, which is separate from the state mandated coastal overlay zone. That's that thick blue line. And you can see that it's actually the majority of our district, the Midway District, is outside of the coastal overlay zone. But we still are kind of stuck with this designation per complete communities that limits us to a 2.5 FAR and a 30-foot height limit. Right next to us, however, there's complete communities tier 3, which I just mentioned in our thought experiment, that is really geared towards creating or incentivizing multifamily and mixed use projects, because it really allows you to max out a site and while providing a mix of affordable units in the project. And typically between state density bonus and complete communities, typically complete communities is a stronger tool, but in this instance, you can see that it's not really the case here. So you know, we think that this is an opportunity to maybe revisit this designation. Okay, next slide. So some opportunities we think are possible in the Midway District is creating a pedestrian and transit oriented type of area in terms of creating residential projects that are pedestrian and transit oriented. We think that that could lead to a reduction in vehicle trips and also support the existing public transit that is present in the area. And it's a huge amenity for any kind of resident in this area. We also think it's important to advocate for a mixture of income levels and not inadvertently create a concentration of affordable housing, because that's the way that you can create the highest and best use on a parcel. It's also important to create an equitable distribution of public services and amenities, and you can do that by providing residential uses in the area and balanced uses to support the local economy by creating mixed use projects. And I think a really big opportunity here also is to create a relationship with the ecology and the natural amenities in the area that is the San Diego River. I think that would be a really significant amenity for any resident in the Midway District.
Excellent. Thanks, Francesca.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Really,
Okay,
you're
I'm on. Sorry, everybody. So I just want to remind you that San Diego County is the 8th largest major metropolitan region in the United States. The region has a severe shortage of housing, and we all wonder, how will another 1 million people be employed and housed here by 2050, which is SANDAG's projection. For the past decade, professional planners and architects, realtors and developers and city officials have carried on a debate over San Diego's inability to provide adequate housing. Groups like Housing You Matters in 2016 and Housing the Next 1 Million in 2017 surfaced to navigate community planning groups along with city planners and council district leaders. Next slide. Housing affordability and lack of low and middle income housing, that missing middle housing, continue to be clear and serious problems for San Diego. San Diego and Rdac continues to study the demographic and migratory patterns of existing and new San Diegans. So a series of reports are shown here that there are actually links on the slide, but you're not going to benefit from that. But these are some components of Rdac's reports and data if you go on the Rdac website to see what's available in terms of regional criteria for housing and climate change and all those good things. Next slide. So according to census information, there are 24,921 residents in the Midway District with a median age of 33.1 years old. Of this, 60% are males and 40% are females. US-born citizens make up 83% of the resident pool, while non-born citizens account for 9.5%. Additionally, 7% of the population is represented by non-citizens. According to Rdac, a 25% increase, or 6,230 new residents, can be expected to be needed in the Midway districts in the next 27 years to get to that 1 million proportional mark. Next slide. Let's not forget the consistent community voices of Mike Stepner, Jack Carpenter, Jim Varnador, Mary Lydon, and Larry Herzog, among others. Mike likes to quote Michael Willis, FAIA, who said, "We can build lots of houses, but the danger is in building houses without a total vision. We need to be guided by the understanding that we are creating neighborhoods and that means transportation, schools, fire stations, open spaces. Every community, as you see the list on the slide there, has to respond to and address the needs of all 9 of those groups, which live in every neighborhood in our city or county." Next slide. Many of our Housing the Next 1 Million volunteers learned that the housing crisis cannot be solved without increasing infrastructure, amenities, jobs, and land use options. It is the sheer will of the public who will ultimately create communities. There are many challenges and impediments from the marketplace, including costs and fees, infrastructure, policies, and politics are all in play. Next slide. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Really powerful stuff. We'll move into the next section.
Yeah, so building off of what Phil and Francesca have previously shared, we took a look at kind of what currently composes the Midway District, and the legacy 30-foot height limit that was established by the local coastal zone that has since been rescinded has really guided all sorts of development in this local community. So next slide. And so looking at a different representation of the zoning map Francesca was previously sharing and talking about, you can see that there's a lot of discrepancy in the types of zones and the density that's provided by each of those all over the district. And it seems that the zoning, when this was established, was really based around existing uses and not highest and best and potential uses. And so what we're seeing is that the current building stock is not referential to the zoning that's established because of that 30-foot height limit. And the zoning and community plan have not really been updated to account for the development policies that have come up more recently to prioritize housing and kind of more mixed use environment. Additionally, as you can see in red, a big portion of the most active parts of this district are reserved for commercial uses only. And so residential uses would not even be allowed, where it should kind of be the opposite, where those commercial uses are really mixed in and pushed to the outside to get people along these transit corridors and the most active and useful portions of the district. And then another element locally is that the transit priorities that were outlined in the community plan have not progressed to the point of that level of aspiration and are just not quite as robust as everyone wishes. So next slide. And also, as Francesca was mentioning, you can see that a major portion of the Midway District is within that half-mile radius of transit. And so this map here is just showing a rough gradient overlay of a quarter mile and a half mile out from existing transit. And that if we can establish that kind of density in ways that we can connect people with easy ways to move around the city, that could start guiding how density and massing develops in the future. And I think one of the elements of making that happen responsibly is paying attention to existing view corridors and paying attention to our neighboring communities that are maybe lower density than what the Midway District is envisioned for. And so we can start having a conversation with that quote unquote NIMBY attitude and start making the compromise and meeting halfway and really creating a mixed use vibrant community that works for everyone, not just for one group of people and works totally against another group of people. And off to you, Todd.
Awesome. Thanks, Evan. So then we also took our chance to study open space and green infrastructure. So some of the guiding principles that we see within the Midway District is to really utilize this study as an opportunity to create a model for reintegrating green space into an existing and complex urban condition. How do we reverse engineer some of the decisions that have been made into this point to reconnect everybody together through these green ribbons? And through that, we establish an urban ecology and interconnected green spaces. There have been previous studies about bay-to-bay connections. At one point, there was a channel that I think was a study that was cut through the Midway District, connecting the San Diego River down to the Liberty Station inlet. So that's something else that we know that is a priority, is to create a bay-to-bay connection, but are there some different ways to do that? We also want, some guiding principles are to utilize the removal of the height restriction to build vertically, and can we start to capture some open space by building vertically and going more vertical instead of horizontal? And then we also want to reinforce the Green Street and linear street connections that are outlined here in the community plan. So what this drawing over to your right really shows is the way the community plan was set up is it's a bunch of smaller vignettes. So what we did is we took all of those vignettes and we stitched it together into one comprehensive district vision. So you can start to outline, okay, this is the city's vision. These are the gateways that you can see in orange. The bluish green are linear streets, and the green is green streets. And each of those has a different designation as to what it really designates itself as. And we'll get into that in a little bit. So here, this is an example of a green street, something within the district that provides connectivity within the district, And this is actually an example of 14th Street downtown, where 14th Street, they did their greenway that's stretching from San Diego City College all the way down to Barrio Logan. And then you have linear streets. These are really connections that happen within the community, but also stretch outside of the community to the adjacencies to regional parks and open space. And then how can these linear streets really be these green conduits to create major safe pedestrian networks for people to navigate and bike and have multimodal transportation in a safe way, away from cars, and they can travel from place to place is just really a major vision that we see as a huge opportunity in this particular district. So some of the challenges are that we are bounded by highways and railways. To the north, we have the 8, to the east, we have the railway plus the 5. So it makes it very difficult to create these green connections. There's also just a sea of asphalt and concrete out here that is, going through all the different agencies and ownerships to try and selectively remove pieces to bring green space back in is definitely going to be a challenge. And then creating bike and safety through major thoroughfares is also a challenge. So then that leads us into some opportunities. Is creating that new urban vocabulary. How can we adapt the built environment to build vertically, capture more open space, embrace nature-based green infrastructural solutions for coastal resilience and future sea level rise? This being a low-lying area, this is probably going to have to be one of the prime areas that we're going to have to start planning for a planned retreat sooner rather than later. And this whole effort is really thinking sustainably about how can we anticipate the needs of our future generations and start to design towards that. ULI also had an interesting 10-minute walk study that was like, if you could document everybody from wherever they live should be able to walk 10 minutes to a piece of open space. So using that as a guiding measurement to try and start to understand where open space can start to weave itself back into the community. And then really looking at how can we create a smooth bay-to-bay connection through a pre-existing complex network. So one thought that we had was if you're downtown and you're coming up through the Midway District, we already have sports arena, the Midway Rising District that's planned, and that has a 35-foot greenway that runs along the south edge that's beautiful. And hopefully that is the catalyst for future developments to connect into and have these threads start to spread out in all different directions. But then also, if this is your bay-to-bay connection, you're going through a very complex urban environment. Glenn and our team were looking at this and we thought, what if Pacific Highway was that major thread that did your bay-to-bay connection? It's a little bit off to the side of the complexities of inside the district, which actually allows maybe it's easier to retrofit in a way that you can make this really comprehensive greenway that stitches everybody through this fine. All the different side connections connect to this major greenway, and this is our new major conduit through the city, as you can see here through that green line. So then this is going north as you exit the 5 onto Pacific Highway, and you can just see that it is just a sea of asphalt and lanes, and we probably don't need this many lanes to substantiate the level of traffic that we have now. And this takes you up through the Navwar site and then up through South Shores of Mission Bay. So really going from bay to bay. What if we took a piece of that and just made a 40-foot wide greenway, and then we consolidated the roads into one area, and now you have this really safe path of travel for people and bikes to connect. And then this could also start to be a catalyst for different developments that want to start to build on this greenway because they see this as such an urban amenity. With that, we'll move into policy.
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Todd. I think what the group has aimed to do with bringing this back to the broader RDAC is to, in some ways, open up our discussion to give a sense of where we've been going with this and what we've been thinking about, some of the internal discussions we've been having, but certainly also to be able to get some feedback from the group. So part of, we would like this to be viewed generally as a transparent discussion, and we do look forward to hearing from you in the next sort of section. One of the discussion points that we've been talking around and trying to get our heads grapple with is how do we as an organization, RDAC, start to impact these discussions and engage with them in a positive and proactive way. So the guiding principles we've been looking at from a policy standpoint is to use this investigation of the Midway District to identify opportunities for advocacy, a more sort of robust engagement with broader issues that are impacting this specific area. We recognize that those will also reach out to other neighborhoods and other parts of the county and the region. And that can take many forms. Some of it can be from the standpoint of engaging community stakeholders, trying to be advocates within the communities, engaging in the community planning groups, helping to educate people on what those plans mean, how they can be implemented, engaging those groups at a larger level, and trying to find ways in which we can take the lessons learned here and possibly also extend them to other community planning group areas in the city. There are 52 communities defined with community plans in San Diego, almost overwhelming amount. But that also means that then there are 52 committees out there that would benefit from having professionals on. And there are a number, I'm sure even in this call, of dedicated people who are on community planning groups, and thank you for that. But I believe there are certainly more opportunities for people to get involved in those groups. And then we also want to make sure we're trying to find opportunities for proactive engagement and coalition building to help improve development processes. We recognize that projects all have their own challenges and issues and constraints that they're working within. But we want to be able to engage those groups proactively and positively, learn the issues that they're coming up against, try to help formulate points for future advocacy, raise questions and identify issues with current policy, and use those for positive engagement with local government and other groups to try to move the whole process forward. So, and ultimately, we're hoping that some of the ideas that come out of this will start to guide broader discussions in the RDAC and the governance subcommittee for future advocacy efforts. Best put. We can go to the next slide, please. So I think what we've heard, some of the challenges, what's been alluded to, the Midway District is ripe for massive change, just in terms of the way the land ownership structure is and current policies regarding redevelopment. Obviously, the city of San Diego, the Midway Rising project is well underway. That has been set up in part by SB 10 and other state measures that require the designation of surplus land and the focus of that for housing. So the choices to redevelop large plots of land in this particular area are happening both at the city and federal level. The Navarre site is, I believe, over 73 acres of property that's going to be redeveloped over a 30-year time frame, but that's still a massive, massive footprint within our city. And I think what's been discussed, there's been a lot of recent change. It's been brought up by Francesca and Phil and Evan and our entire group in terms of how different efforts recently Measure C, coastal zone, height limit repeal, complete communities, and state SB 10 have impacted the pathways towards development in this area. So we do believe that there's opportunity to advocate for a simplification of that. Evan certainly mentioned that in the base zoning. How can we positively and proactively engage the city in a discussion of how that can be made more easily, so it's more easily understood and reflects a broader vision instead of small parceled elements. And so we think that there's those challenges start to define opportunities. So we can go to the next slide. Through our discussions with DK, certainly he, and as the chair of the Midway Community Planning Group, has welcomed our group's involvement with them. And we are planning an opportunity to meet with the community planning group to have a broader conversation about some of these findings, hear from them what they have been able to engage with in their conversations around planning in the area, what issues they're facing, what opportunities they see for change. And then also wanting to identify policy gaps impacting the Midway community and align those ideas and potential policy initiatives with broader AAA San Diego advocacy efforts. Again, how do we engage with the questions of redevelopment surrounding surplus land designation? That's also happening down in the civic core redevelopment. That's going to be happening downtown. How do we engage with questions regarding professional services and procurement processes? Certainly aware that not every firm in the city is keen to work with the city, and that should raise certain flags as well. So there's a question and issue to be discussed there. And then how can we contribute to what Heidi von Bloom presented to us a few months back when she came to talk to this group? How can we engage in the city's annual zoning policy amendment process in a organized and cohesive manner? And how can we establish working relationships with local city council members and planning staff? Because really these are the people who are having to execute these ideas from the city's standpoint, and having a positive relationship with them so that we're aware of where they're moving and how is going to be key to moving these discussions forward. So I think with that, Todd, if I may, we would like to open to general feedback. And certainly if there's folks who are interested in this, interested in sort of the questions we're starting to probe at, as you saw, we had a long list of ideas early on and only are touching on some of them. But we recognize it's a big room of experts and certainly would welcome your thoughts surrounding the Midway District, potential for engagement in the development of this and how we might tackle some of the complexities of redevelopment in our city.
Great, so we'll use that to open it up for any questions or comments that anyone has. Sounds like we nailed it.
Well, I'd like to thank you all for all your hard work.
I'll ask a question.
Go ahead.
Steve Pontel. I guess the question is, has there been any work yet, or do you see a path towards the fiscal side of what would be necessary to create the infrastructure in order to implement some of these plans? I mean, between the city, the county, and Sandag, any theory on how to pay for the infrastructure?
I think as a topic, it's certainly important and kind of existentially illusional to how all of these things can kind of come to pass. But our evaluation has really been on where there's room for improvement in the community plans and looking towards highest and best use. So we're kind of ahead of tactical development and really looking at big picture right now. So what you're asking about is certainly a topic that I think is an immediate concern in this zone as development starts ramping up on these two major sites. But so far it hasn't yet been a focus of what we've been looking at. And so I think as a team, we'd be open to hearing how maybe some of that tactical input could maybe become a part of this overall evaluation. And we'd certainly look for some other people to get involved to help with that effort as well.
Yeah, Steve and Susan, thank you for raising your hand. I'll get to you in just a second. I think Steve, you've identified a clear gap in the community plan process, which assumes that development happens on a case-by-case basis, and then also relies on individual projects to respect and adhere to the community plan in order to achieve these larger goals. So no, I don't think we have a broader theory on how we might leverage funding from city, county, or Sandag. Certainly that's a that's a bigger question to be asked, but in terms of how the current process goes, there's a clear risk that we are unable to achieve those infrastructures because they are larger, necessarily so, because they must connect multiple projects in multiple areas. But we will miss on the ability to achieve them because we're expecting a piece-by-piece delivery. So as I see your comment, you're identifying a great opportunity for future advocacy. So thank you for that. Susan, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you. So I've looked at this plan when I was working on the Parks Master Plan. I was looking specifically at this plan, and the Midway Pacific Highway Plan, when it was adopted, or right after it was adopted, they created a public facilities financing plan that was very detailed about the infrastructure needs, at least based on the plan as it stood, which I was very surprised that plan basically didn't address the Target, Lowe's, or Home Depot, the big box retail that's across the street from Midway Rising. I was sort of shocked that the city hadn't basically just left it as it was. They didn't propose housing there or redevelopment there. So I think there's an incredible opportunity in this area, as you're pointing out, for, this area is so ripe for creating a new community with all the bells and whistles, I would suggest. But I think you should look at the Public Facilities Financing Plan. It is on the website. But I also would point out that now that the city has gone from community-based fees, which was the situation when they did that financing plan, and I think the purpose of doing the financing plan was to come up with the fees that could be charged or should be charged to as that area redeveloped or develops. But now the city has citywide fees that are going into, a citywide pot. And so the question becomes, when there is redevelopment of this area, and for example, all the areas in the city, I'm also been looking at and working on the university community plan, which is proposing 30,000 more units and 60,000 more jobs. How do we provide the infrastructure when there's no facility benefit assessment, the FBA program, and there's no community-based money? That money, there are ways to address that, but it will take new tools that we haven't used in the city of San Diego, or haven't been used very, very often. But there is a good document that you should be aware of, if you're not, of that Public Facilities Financing Plan. Thank you.
Good to know. Thanks, Susan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Susan, if you happen to have a link of that, and you could throw it in the chat.
Oh yeah, sure, I'll do that.
That would be great. Thank you.
I will do that. Mm-hmm.
I think I just found it.
Looks like somebody beat me to it.
Great.
Yeah. It was done in 2000, I believe it was 2019.
that would correlate with the update to the community plan, which I believe was also
Right.
2018,
I
2019.
believe there was also someone, a landscape architect, and now I've forgotten the details, who was hired to do a very detailed plan for, as part of the community plan update, but I think that didn't get incorporated or didn't get used. I'm not even sure if it's available for review, but I remember when we were doing our park work, talking to this person, again, whose name I don't remember, who was very frustrated that all this work that he and his firm had done on landscaping and open space and public places for this community had not basically seen the light of day. If I think I will like try to remember who that was. If I can, I'll send you an email, Todd.
That'd be great. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, at the end of this, we're, as we're going through this exploration, it's our goal to engage with the public and kind of try to share the ideas that we have. But what if this actually led to a community plan amendment where we start to see some of the holes, and then through that we can start to provide additional information for people to reference as they're starting to build out this community plan update.
And I guess for the larger group here, I think what Todd's talking about is really one of the goals of us taking on this evaluation to begin with. We want to create that conversation with the people who sit on these community planning groups and with the city on how we can continue to develop in a very smart way. So as Todd mentioned, any further voices we can add to that conversation, I think, are worth having.
If I can, just a comment, I want to commend the committee for the work that's been done. It needs to be taken the next step and really, as you say, Todd, become a plan amendment. It needs to be advocated for. But the approach that your group took to look at the details and how they fit together is a model that needs to be used as a template around the city. So, since the Marine Corps base is in there, use a Navy term, bravo Zulu, for the work that you've done.
I appreciate that, Mike. Thank you. Yeah, and who knows where this could lead us, right? I mean, I don't want to overpromise anything, but there's a World Design Capital coming up. So there's a lot of different ways that we can share visionary kind of analysis and community plans in different ways. I mean, I think we're excited to continue our research. As a regional design, as a subcommittee, we've been really focused on Midway, as you can see, but we still want to also entertain other regional evaluations, large scale, and then continue as the subcommittee grows. We're going to continue looking at Midway, but also be looking elsewhere as well. Go ahead, Jack. I see you have your hand up.
Yeah. Yes. I'm sure there are people in this meeting and who live in Point Loma, and Point Loma is heavily impacted by that intersection with Sports Arena and Midway. The only way we're going to solve the density requirements here and the traffic problem is you get the density enough, high enough, so we're going to have public transportation. Otherwise, it won't work.
That's a good point.
I also might mention that you referred to SB 10. The next workshop that we talked about earlier in the meeting is going to address that. And SB 10, we might pick out pieces and parts of it. But by and large, the title of that workshop is moving from SB 10 to housing in general, because SB 10 isn't going to go anywhere.
And I think on SB 10, there's a larger conversation that has to happen with the city and all of these community groups, that it needs to be implemented. If it's going to be implemented, it needs to be implemented in a smart way. It can't just be a blanket across the city. I don't think as a blanket policy that meets the goals of all of the various neighborhoods that make up the broader community of San Diego. So, you know, certainly a very complex issue that we've only begun to look at as part of this overall evaluation, but I think it's an important topic as it continues to circulate in local government.
I had another comment.
Go ahead.
The other thing that I think is associated with this project and then other community plans is Blueprint San Diego. So I don't know if you have been looking at Blueprint San Diego, but I think I would urge you to look at the city's proposal for that, which they're doing an EIR that will cover for Blueprint San Diego that will cover the university community plan update, the college area, Uptown, and Claremont, I believe, and maybe others that are, you know, coming down the pike. So I think that's an area where this group and others should be, you know, that it's something that we should all be paying attention to. And I can't remember if the planning department has made a presentation about Blueprint to this group, but I would suggest that maybe that would be a good topic for a future meeting.
Just to quickly remind everybody, the Housing the Next 1 Million exercise involved a targeted kind of greatest need area in each of the 9 city council districts. So there was one project area like the Midway in each council district that, you know, teams were created with architects in the council district who might, you know, target or understand, like we did this research for Midway, and how each of the districts might, you know, speak up and have a project area that might look at some of these issues, either from a design guidelines or a necessity for infrastructure or greatest fiscal need, those kinds of things, and involve the neighbors and the citizenry of those areas. That was the general target of Housing the Next 1 Million. And not that we can do this as this subcommittee, but I think as we move forward, and especially with the design capital work, you know, I think we might be able to raise enough individuals who would stand up in their council district and say, I want to have a conversation about this here.
Thanks, Phil. Leslie, you have your hand raised.
Hi, everyone, and I'll try to put on the camera as well. Thanks, Phil, for that presentation, and all of you, Evan and Todd and Jonathan as well. I just wanted to follow on, Phil, to what you were saying, because I hope everyone read it's Union Tribune, which I guess is Axios now, that their August 14th article in the paper, Sandag announced their downward future projections of population growth. And I'll rattle off some stats from that article. But I just want to preface it by saying that working in the planning department, we all have been working on this, like you said, Phil, you know, like adding more and more people over the next few decades. So I was dumbfounded to read this article, and I'm still waiting to have a larger conversation with our planning staff on this, because it affects what everyone's doing, you know, at the city and also in the private sector. But here's what the article said. They said that from 1980 to 2000, that San Diego added 1 million population. From 2000 to 2020, we only added 500,000. And the new projections are from 2023 up to 2050, we'll add 140, only 140,000, at which time we will peak. And by 2060, we'll be back down to only plus 40,000 from where we are today. So that's just a complete, I mean, if their projections are correct now, assuming that they were before, but if these are correct now, it's a complete game changer in terms of total housing perhaps needed in the area. It doesn't alleviate the discussion of the missing middle. And as several of you have mentioned, about I think Jonathan said about SB 10, and as Jack mentioned also, that did not get passed at Planning Commission, and no other city in the state of California passed it. So it may not come to fruition that we all have to work under that. Just wanted to share some of those thoughts. And then Midway as a community plan was just updated in 2018. And Susan, I agree with you. The name of that landscape architect is on the tip of my tongue also. He did wonderful work, and the work, as far as I know, did get folded into Midway. But let's also all remember that the total population for Midway pursuant to the plan says only 4,600 people for total population, which means that really not that many people live here relative to our other communities, such as La Jolla, which was supposed to have 35,000, now has 45,000. Peninsula right next to it, I haven't checked their population, but probably far greater. So it's just something everyone has to deal with, which is still to today, this area remains largely a commercial area. But thanks for giving me some time.
Can I respond to that?
Sure.
Thanks. So, I think one of the challenges with the Midway District is the amount of underutilized land, and I think part of what I was trying to get at is part of the issue is the low density in the area that prevents mixed use projects from being feasible from a developer standpoint. So I know that there are not a lot of people that live in the Midway District, but there is a lot of existing transit, and it would be really, I think, a good opportunity to help support that existing transit and create some more of that transit oriented and pedestrian oriented residential development in that area since it exists. And there's a lot of underutilized land, a lot of asphalt basically in the area. So we, although it is the case that today the residential population is pretty low, I think who wouldn't want to live 10 minutes away from the beach? I see it as an opportunity area.
And thank you also, Francesca, for your presentation.
Oh, thanks. Appreciate it.
Jack, is your hand still up?
Yes. An earlier question had to do with infrastructure. And the city has this development impact fees, which says every development has to contribute to the infrastructure. Well, if you recall, years ago, we had a program where we were going to have city of villages, and that was supposed to be a solution paralleling this. It never got off the ground because we're going to get the infrastructure. And that's a big problem. You can't incrementally do it through contractor impact fees. Somebody's got to take the big picture and say, well, we're going to have to expand the sewer by this much in order to accommodate that much development. I don't see a way to do that.
Maybe that's something we study as a part of the greater vision that we're identifying. Good point, Jack. Well, we're here at our hour, just beyond it. So I know everybody is busy. So I appreciate all the time, all the effort that the volunteers have put in up to this point. And thank you for all the great feedback. And if you're interested in being a part of the discussion as we move forward as a subcommittee, feel free to send me an email, reach out to Lee at AIA, or you can reach out to me, Schmidt Design Group, and we can weave you into those conversations.